Okay. Hi, I'm Gregg Solomon. I'm the money. Important here. I'll first go into just some general tips about proposals, about the review process. Not anything earth-shattering, but lots, as is often the case, lots of little ideas. And if you don't do them right, you don't get the money. And then I'll talk about some specific programs that you might apply to, certainly at NSF, and then open it up to questions. Obviously, not all funding organizations are the same. NSF, IES is at the Department of Education in the US. They run their process very differently than NIH does. Department of Defense, Office of Naval Research, different again. Private organizations and other countries as well. Right. Constraints on the scope of what they can fund vary hugely, so you better pay attention in the announcements. For example, we are constrained where I am at NSF to funding STEM. STEM is actually a legal term, putting constraints on what the education director at NSF is able to fund. It used to be called SMET, Science, Math, Engineering, and Technology, and everyone understood that applied just to us. And then someone said, SMET is ugly. Turned it into STEM, and it's spun off into the universe. Everyone knows what STEM is. It's SMET, really. Look, when you're trying to decide what organization you want to submit to, who cares about your project outcomes? And also you want to consider within those organizations, how close to practice your work is, what the implications are. It could be very, very basic, very exploratory work, or work, if you're getting industry funding, for example, in which the output really should have some traction pretty quickly. Again, explore, if you know people who've gotten funding by them, go to their websites, see what they're valuing, what they're looking at, what new directions they're looking in. If you have colleagues who have passed awards or declines, take a look at them, very informative. And again, the processes vary enormously. We put together review panels. There are organizations who might envy greatly, in which the program officers just make the calls. And so they can often fund very quickly, make a decision very quickly. We take a little bit more time. The role actually, again, between organizations of the program director is quite different. We work with people, encourage people to come and send us proposals and actually work with them on the proposals. We put the review panels together and we make the calls as to what to fund at NSF. It's something like NIH or in the Department of Education. I know there are walls between those different functions. The people who work directly with the PIs are not the people who put the panels together. They don't make the calls. We do. So there are lots of guardrails out for how we can, to prevent us from abusing that system. Anyway, even within NSF, there are a lot of things that vary. Features vary hugely. Look at who's on the panel. In some cases, NIH, for example, you can see who is on the various standing panels. With us, we put them together on almost an ad hoc basis. It matters. You want to look at the kinds of people who are on the panels. This will vary program to program, area within an agency. Very, very multidisciplinary. Other programs will be everybody from a single subfield. That has huge implications for how you're going to write a proposal. What kind of shared understanding goes into what you're pitching and how much time you're going to spend on them. Methods and analyses, how much do you lay out on them? Fields have biases about what are appropriate methods, what are appropriate analyses and which aren't. Is pilot testing required? Not always. I mean, I've had colleagues who argued against my funding an award because, well, they've already begun. I had to explain the concept of a pilot test, right? This person would have declined the award because they'd done pilot testing. Again, you want to know about the programs you're looking at. One big way, by the way, I don't have it in here, is talk to the program officers, call them up, right? They're looking for good work and they'll give you good advice, hand you the keys to the kingdom. Budget sizes matter hugely. They vary enormously how much money you can ask for. Sometimes for the same amount of work, sometimes the scopes have to vary enormously. How much PI effort you can put in, how much time you can put in. Can you put together an advisory board? Can you fund postdocs and graduate students and RAs off your big differences, right? Huge differences. When you ask for a lot of money for a lot of these efforts in some programs, the reviewers think you're being outrageous by asking for so much money. They look down on you for it. And others, they look at you and go, don't you know what this work entails? How come you're not looking for a postdoc and an RA, right? Same ideas. You've got to know what they're looking at, what is kind of typical on a panel. And the huge differences in how much proposal pressure there are, right? Is it that they have this many proposals worth funding and they're only going to fund this many? Or is it the case where if you can convince the program officers that this is worth doing and convince the review panels this is worth doing, they can fund it, right? Very different circumstances that you're looking at here. Again, underappreciated advice. Part of my rap when I talk to people who've been declined, when you're writing proposals, particularly for something like my program where it's multidisciplinary, you have to be vague about something, right? And so on my panels, there will be somebody who knows your area cold, right? They absolutely know it. And they're looking for you to go into tremendous detail on what you're going to do and know how you're going to move beyond it. Sitting next to them with just as much of a say as somebody who didn't even know you could ask this sort of question, let alone that there's a literature on it, right? You're going to want to know this. And so you can't satisfy everybody. You're going to have to be vague about something. And this is part of the art of it. Are you being vague about the right things? We'll get things. I'm going to put people in the magnet, and then we're going to analyze these things appropriately. Oh, are you really? Right. Where they're vague on what they're vague on. That's the game, right? 10 years decided on whether you're going to do that sort of stuff properly. Can you really just run across it? Or are there areas in which you can really, assume that the PI knows what's going on, but you can signal some of these things as well. You can say, as demonstrated in so-and-so 1954, we'll follow these standards, or some other work that you've done as well. Another thing about writing these things is think about who's reading them. I say, consider these tired middle-aged eyes reading quickly, people reading these things on the fly, on the airplane. We tell them not to, but people are reading these things often at night. It's not like writing a journal article, right? Every little word is not going to be something that grabs them. As they get bored, they're gone. Or they're just going to skim through things. You want to get them. You want to hang on to them. And you can repeat things that are important, right? Because people will miss things. We don't pay people very much to do these things. They're tired. If they're any good, they're very busy. So you want to make sure to really highlight these things. Graphic design matters in putting a proposal together. Don't try to cram as many words as you can into it. They'll hate you, right? You don't want them to start out hating you when they're reading a proposal. As I say, exposition matters so much. And get comments. You're putting together an advisory board, and some programs allow it. Get folks on there. Get them a draft of your proposal into somebody's hands, and if they're good, they're busy, enough time for them to really read these things, give you feedback that you can act on, right? It's often a very good thing if you have a sense for who's going to be on these panels, especially, again, if it's multidisciplinary. Get somebody from those other fields that you think are going to be on there. Or if you're saying in the proposal, this has great implications for whatever, math education, right? I would put somebody as a program officer from math education on there to read it. You should get somebody from math education to read your proposal. You're going to get things like, they don't understand what you're saying. That's gold, right? Their identical twin is not going to get it either. So pick up the telephone, right? Call them up, explain it to them when they go, oh, I see. Or how you explained it, and put that in. Even though you already explained it elsewhere in another way, people from different fields pick up on the different language, different ways of explaining it. You see this in panels all the time, people getting the proposals wrong. It's not what their point is. That's a big idea in these things. So use them, or they might disagree with you. Sometimes that's fine if they disagree. In fact, you often want to cultivate that on the board. Somebody who might have a disciplinary difference with you. So you don't have to go with what they think, but acknowledge that there might be a divergence of opinion, disciplinary especially. When you read a proposal and you have a reviewer who's just unfair, just putting the worst possible spin to what you wrote, right? You've annoyed them in some way. The biggest way of annoying them is ignoring their field or coming in and saying, this is going to be the first proposal ever to do X. That was their dissertation topic and they're pissed, right? And again, the idea is you can tip a hat to think, understood that there's this alternative way of looking at it. Space precludes my going into it. Rest assured, I know it's there. Great, there is space. All right, especially for folks doing cognitive neuro work. And I put education, I'm in the education directorate. Again, most don't assume everybody's going to know your literature in all these depths. They might be biased against certain things. In my area, we say that all literatures are equal. Education is more equal than anything else, right? They're going to say, if you don't know something in the cognitive literature, oh, nobody can know every literature. But if you don't know something in their literature, that's fatal, right? So you want to know this about where you're sending things in. And again, advisory reports can help you hugely, getting people to give you feedback on proposals. There are huge differences in methodological and analytic differences between groups, right? One big thing, for example, I'll see in education proposals, people from schools of education, they put these giant ecologically valid studies together, really complex, really kind of messy, hairy stuff. Where I was as a cognitive scientist, and we would do 10 studies, 15 studies that are logically interleaved and expecting the results to come out because they're correcting or we're controlling for all these different variables. And as a group, they'll make an argument. These are very different ways of approaching often the same problem. Get a sense for what's going on. Give the readers this overview of what's going on. I'll just interject here. Also, if you're pursuing a question, sometimes it's not appropriate for a single proposal, a single grant. It's very often the case that people put together a patchwork of grants. So go to different agencies, different programs, even multiple proposals to the same program. This can be very helpful. Instead, if you try to do too much at once and cover too much ground, it's going to flop. And again, are you giving contextual and practical issues appropriate weight? Again, this will vary according to the kind of program that it is, who's funding it. Yeah, blah, blah. Okay, another of the really big issues, dissemination, impact on practice, right? Again, if it's in education, what I almost always am doing is pulling back the proposal's claims about the impact that this will have, the direct impact. They'll say, and we're going to get this into the hands of teachers, or get this into the hands of policymakers. And it's almost always entirely inappropriate. There's so much more work to be done between often very exploratory, insightful research, great stuff, and having it have an impact in practice industries this way as well. You see this in medicine, translational medicine. You see the Department of Agriculture, different ideas about how do you move things along. Now, from our perspective as program officers, we can see huge gaps in the field on misunderstandings. Somebody might come in and do work on, let's say, teaching Darwinian evolution. You follow these 10 steps, and by God, look, I'm going to get this right into the hands of teachers. Well, okay, taught by you with your PhD or your really smart graduate students going through those 10 steps. Yeah, it was really effective in this university classroom where you were teaching it or something like that, right? In practice, so how many lessons do you have for how long? Teachers don't have time for 10 steps. They're going to do 2 that seem cool. Is there any research on what happens when you just teach 2 of these steps? Or you're going to have some teacher education in there. How much? So dosage, how often, who's teaching, to whom, in what context? These are not necessarily incredibly interesting questions to you, but the success or failure of this in practice really rides on a lot of these issues. So people frequently overstate the importance of what they want to do. At the same time, you want to make the implications clear if you're doing really basic research. Say why somebody should why this is important eventually for practice, let's say. That's why we get money from Congress. But in doing so, you don't want to overstate it. You want to lay it out because they might not see it, make the big ideas clear, but don't overstate it. Instead, what you want to make clear is if you're thinking the path this would take, the chain of implication this would have eventually to getting forward, be explicit about who's going to have a hold of it, and are you speaking at those conferences? Are you going to publish in those journals, right? Who are you going to hand it off to? What form are the R&D folks you want to give this to? What kind of information are they looking for, right? Do not assume that they read your journal. They don't, right? All this great work goes, and that really does have true implications for practice, and it just languishes in these basic research journals. Nobody's reading, right? So you want to think in that. That's what we really encourage people getting there. As I say, there's a lot of intellectual heavy lifting still to do after you've got a true insight and really have shown at a basic level that this is real. Think about who's going to pick it up afterwards. Okay. All right. Decline doesn't mean go away forever. Amazing how many people disappear when they get a decline. Even the most excoriating reviews doesn't necessarily mean go away. Okay. There can be really straightforward reasons. It often is the case. And by the way, so call up the program officers. I invite people to call me up after things have gone through, they've been declined. I can't tell them who is on the panel, but I walk them through it. I can say things like, this reviewer is from such and such a field. Now you know, it didn't get across to the neuroscientist. It didn't get across to the person from EdSite or the statistician or the person from education, right? Now you know the way you pitched it didn't get through that community of people. So you want to pull that up. It could just be expositional at some level. It could be that the insight, this was correctly declined. The reviews you're looking at really were pointing out problems in it. You might not have weighted those problems the way they did, but your project will be better if you pay attention. And I can say things like, I know you know this person. I know you respect this person. Pay attention, right? It'll make it better. Sometimes it is, they just overweighted things that you wouldn't have. Sometimes they'll take you to task and you had addressed that. That's your fault. Again, those tired middle-aged guys. Page 8, third line from the bottom, second paragraph. I talked about that. Oh, good one. Now you know to highlight, right? People think that's important and you didn't highlight. And these are stupid things, right? It's the difference between getting a couple $1 million in. Sometimes the reviews are wrong, just wrong, right? They really missed it. We don't intentionally put morons on the panel, I gotta say. No, look, we're reaching out. I put somebody on the panel because I read an article and wow, this is perfectly appropriate. Let's pull them in. And then you realize the second author wrote that paper very clearly, right? Don't think that this review that's completely wrong is why you got the decline, right? We look at those, and unlike NIH, for example, where they average the scores, we can dismiss reviews, just not pay attention and go, no, got it wrong. And that's it, it's over. You've called me up and I'll say, yeah, we didn't pay attention to that one. Done, right? It's a natural way to protect yourself to think, oh, NSF. That's why they declined, because idiots. We may be idiots, but that isn't why we declined it. All right, so the next step is, and then we can work with you. Sometimes it's just a matter of expertise to get this thing across, to emphasize, to go in more detail or less detail about certain things. You might have to redesign the project, right? You can do it, put in a few more months, and here's $1 million worth of time. Or it could be another program that's more appropriate. It's really not a good fit. We can tell you that too. All right. Sometimes the project itself is not appropriate, right? This is a dead end. And we tell folks, and the reviewers, if they're any good, will say, this is not a productive line. These are people's careers. We might be wrong about that, but I'll say, nobody's excited about this direction. We often get together at the next level, program officers, and ask, so let's say this worked out exactly the way people say it would. So what? Does anyone care? Again, sometimes it matters at a basic scientific level, right? Explanation is one. Good to know. And sometimes they're making claims for how this is going to hit practice, industry, or education. Does it really matter? Or is this an interesting insight that's going to account for this much of a variance in how kids behave, right? That's a real so what. Not worth our effort. All right, a little bit more about NSF though. Just generally, for those of you who don't know, NSF at some level flatters itself to say it's sort of structured like a university, right? Think of the directorates. Have you heard that? It's like the school, like there's the School of Biology, the School of Engineering. I happen to live in the School of STEM education, right? There's School of Social Behavior and Economic Sciences. I'm going to mostly talk about the programs in my own directorate. I work a lot, given my background, with folks in what's called SBE, Social Behavioral and Economic Sciences, right? They're the ones who fund psychology, neuro, so on. Those panels, by the way, tend to be monodisciplinary. So if you're sending a proposal into somebody in developmental science, right? It's more like a journal article there because everybody knows that literature and you're kind of signaling. So your literature review, when you do it, is pointing that you get it. You know where it fits in this literature. Everyone knows this literature. You don't have to go on and on about it. There's much more space in your proposal then to go on the actual methods, the analyses that you're going to do, that sort of thing. Coming to us, they don't know developmental psychology. You can't just say, refer to a famous paper. They won't get it. They don't know what you're referring to. You have to give the space to describe what that literature means, what that paper meant, how it's placed in there. This takes up space that you would have devoted to something else, right? Anyway, in education, where I am, the panels tend to be much more multidisciplinary. Within a directorate, right? So within EDU, the Directorate for STEM Education, there are divisions. These are like departments, right? I'm in the Division of Research on Learning, the department, right? And then within that, there are programs. Programs are where the action is. The programs give out money, right? And you want to find, and they week in and out of existence. So you want to be up on what's happening. They can change emphases, talk to people, look it up. You can go to the NSF website, see what else they've funded. This is my main program, and it's funded a number of people in this room. It used to be called Science of Learning Program, SOL, which eventually became Science of Learning Centers. It's also called Research on Learning and Education Role. It was called REACE. It's now called ECR. Welcome to Alphabet City. It's the government. This is a basic research program. We call it fundamental research because basic tends to carry baggage that we don't necessarily intend. So this is exploratory research, right? The output does not have to hit practice. It can. The idea is it should have implications for practice, and it's incumbent upon you to make those implications clear, but they eventually could become, not necessarily that you carry out that follow-up work. It should move the basic research literatures, and as I say, the impact on practice is likely to be long-term and indirect. It's going to go through other communities, other literatures. Make it clear that they're going to get them. We're multidisciplinary at the portfolio level. We don't require an individual proposal to be multidisciplinary, but they tend to be. Often it's the case that the work you're doing is very similar to work being done elsewhere, and they've got some expertise. One of the goals of the program is to bring folks from these different fields together. Rigor in theory, method, and analysis, but we're agnostic as to exactly how you're going to do it. Do your methods and analyses warrant the kinds of claims you want to make? We've done case studies, survey work, experimental work, quasi-experiments, whatever, right? What are the claims that you can make out of this? Our award sizes vary between 500,000 and 2.5 million. Here's examples of some work we've funded, good Lord. Again, folks in this room, a lot of the talks I heard today could have come to us for money, right? Talk to us about it. Next deadline is in October. By the way, I'll save it at the end. ways to find out about the program is to serve as a reviewer. I do something called blooding potential PIs, principal investigators. I search people out, and first I might have you be an ad hoc reviewer. That's like being a journal reviewer, right? I'll give you a proposal to read, right? And you mail this in, and we get it, and it supplements what the panel gets. And then at the panel, they would read this review as well. Just give you a taste for what a proposal looks like that comes to it. Then sitting on a panel is really where you see it, because you get to read a lot of proposals and hear about even more being discussed and hear the kind of comments around the room. And you hear people just getting really upset. And you go, wow, so that bothers you? Now you know that in math education, doing a certain kind of work, them's fighting words to make these kinds of claims or do work in a certain way. Good to know, right? Good to know. To come in and get a sense for what happens, and then you can start sending in your own proposal. Right? So we're a more basic program. Here's one of our partner programs, the Discovery Research Pre-K-12. This is an applied research program. Much more to the case that the output from this should pretty quickly be able to hit this. They have even more money. They'll fund things for up to $5 million. By the way, so the amount of money you ask for, again, you can get a sense for what's going on. Asking for too little money can be just as bad as asking for too much. Too much sometimes looks unseemly, but asking for too little, we'll get things where, somebody's going to code 1,000 hours of videotape, and they're going to hire an undergraduate to do this, and they're going to pay them for a week or two. Oh, good one. You've never done this before, have you? Right? It's so clear that the amount of support they're looking for really undermines your faith that they know how to do the work. So again, this varies by program and how much money they have. We happen to have a lot in NSF terms. Too much, too little, you can talk to us what's appropriate. Or again, you can see other awards we've made. Look at the kind of work that's being done and get a sense for the size of the budgets. Budgets are less important than folks in the field think, by the way. We smack them around after the panel a lot. Cut money out. Add money, shift the money. That's all fine. We don't expect that you're necessarily experts in how to put together a budget. We can do that with you, right? The idea is to get the work. You know what's going on. Anyway, Dare K-12. This program, much more applied, right? Much more this is instructional materials development, teacher education, that sort of thing. There's much more money in it. You're going to have practitioners at some point on these panels as well. That's formal education. We also do informal education, after school programs. We use, television series, that sort of thing. That's what these people fund, what goes on at home. And so we'll fund a lot of work on that as well. Their budgets are big as well, relatively speaking. Was originally a cross-director program. There are a number of these that different directors are involved. I was actually hired originally to be in this program. And this is very similar to the program that I'm in. It's really kind of exploratory basic research in learning. And the output has some implications for practice, but again, it's distant. To give you an idea, and here's often the same kind of communities applying one or the other. This is in SBE, right? The Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences. And the odds are there are going to be more program officers, reviewers who are from those kind of behavioral and cognitive science fields on these. Unlike my program, where I'm the cognitive scientist, right? If something doesn't appear on my panel, odds are not very good that a cognitive scientist or a psychologist even will be reading the proposal. I should say in our program, what happens, we'll get 400 proposals in a call, right? And we divide them up into sub-panels run by a different program officer. So we might merge all the ones having to do with math learning together, the ones with a cognitive bent together, or neuro bent, and so on. Things having to do with engagement, broadening participation, persistence of the workforce. They'll kind of group them together. The panels are different, the program officers are different. They look at different sorts of things. Again, you can help, again, we can work with you. What you put in the title, there's a sorting that goes on. We can help you direct those. So it goes to a panel where people will understand what you're coming up with. just in SBE, another in perception, action, cognition. This is the cognitive psychology program, okay? Much less money, an order of magnitude less money than we have, right? More monodisciplinary, but very relevant, and you can see relevant to the work that goes on here. We talk to each other, we often co-fund with them. Developmental psychology, developmental science, same idea, right? More focused, not as much money. For them, you know, these $500,000, $700,000 awards are giant awards. These are tiny awards for us. These are small awards. Again, other kind of cross-disciplinary programs. I'm one of the leads in this program. This is one in which they're kind of, it's mind and brain. How do we bring these ideas together? And this is program officers from engineering, biology, information sciences, and so on, together, looking at proposals that don't really fit. They have to be novel. They have to be creative. They have to be a little risky, right, for them to come here. This is currently being revised, so I won't say that much more about it. And then there are lots of cyber IT AI programs that are coming in, especially now, right? And so if you're interested, you can look, there have been programs that explicitly look for creative computation, programs like that, but across the agency, you can put in topics and pull up programs and talk about them and go into them. I won't go into that much more detail, but this is a big deal now. What can you do with large language models, with AI? How can this work in here? There's money for that, increasingly more money. So again, be a reviewer, be a program officer, suggest people to us. Your former graduate students, you know, young professors, great. We'll pull them in. Again.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we have time for a few questions. If anyone can.
You can find me.
Okay, Adam.
All right, how about a penny for you?
But I can't give you.
You can, I can give you, you can't give me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a question I have, I don't know, maybe other people in the room have it too. The word creativity, right? We've talked a lot about whether we should even be using that word here. Valid question. But the word creativity in the title of an NSF grant, or even just, you know, highlight, you know, being overt that this is about creativity. What's your sense right now? And maybe if you have a sense of if that's changed at all over 10, 15 years, 2 years, the reception that receives, at least on your panels, right? Maybe
Yeah,
I'll just leave
yeah, there's a change. We had just talked a little bit about that. There's a similar idea, consciousness, same idea. Serious scientists can study consciousness now. They can study creativity. 10 years ago, less so. We funded some, and we got very little on it, and the panelists were disposed against it. That's not really true now. I mean, you look, for us, you would have to make the arguments, as many of these talks today have, about what the implications are for whatever the mission of the program. For us, for academic performance, for the workforce, that's great, talking our language. Yeah, so yeah, look, there's a lot of crappy work in creativity, right? And that's what a lot of people have in mind, right? So just make the case that it's not that.
But you don't think it's judged as much, or is that just wishful thinking?
No, I think that's true. No, I think that's true. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's
yeah. No. I think we fund more of it.
Yeah.
Some of it. Why do you?
Yeah, I think we've been, few of us, encouraged by, you know, being able to say that word aloud and not.
Look, come in, and look. Let's say somebody pounds you. I can dismiss that reviewer and put less weight on that reviewer. And if it really doesn't make the case, for those of you who've spoken to me, I'll be very blunt about what happened to your and what the next step should be, for sure.
So we're now. So we will now